Good morning and welcome to Thursday Thought and our new strand on community. When I was a child, life was full of things that sounded great but were actually fairly disappointing. A day at the seaside, for example, inevitably meant sitting in a cold gale with very little on, with very little to do, getting changed in public, which a British man hates, and having a picnic full of sand. Ice cream in the 1970s was still made to some secret grim wartime recipe made of milk substitute and a cocktail of chemicals giving the faintest half-hearted attempt at purporting to be some sort of flavour. And visits to maiden aunts, once the home baking had been consumed, inevitably meant sitting bored while the grown-ups talked about distant relations you'd never met. In a similar way, the reality of community often doesn't quite match up to its billing. It sounds like utopia. Everyone longs to be part of a community. People move out to the countryside hoping to become part of one, and governments worry about the decline of community across the country. But the reality of community living is often very different. Incomers find that their utopia is already inhabited with people who have strong ideas of their own and don't necessarily agree with yours. And they're full of just the sort of annoying neighbour you left your last place to avoid. And if you've grown up in a community, you find it populated with people who still think of you as a child, or with schoolmates who don't realise that you've all grown up now and you have a right to be taken seriously as an adult. The reality of community living can be a little bit like 1970s ice cream. Sounds great, but the reality can be pretty disappointing, so much so that you really want to give up on it. But I think the difficulty of community living is also the best thing about it. We human beings are social animals. We're designed to live in community. Now, most people nowadays will tell you that if you want to know who you are, you look inwards, examine your own heart. But my experience is that that doesn't really work. It's just like peeling away the layers of an onion. All you find is layer upon layer of past experience and old growth, which doesn't really tell you very much about who you are. I think you find out who you are through your relationships, and most particularly by living in community. In the Christian tradition, we're taught to love our neighbours as ourselves. And that hints at a deeper wisdom that tells us that our neighbours' being and our own being are inextricably linked, that in their welfare lies your welfare. We learn who we are by loving our neighbours, and learning also to be more lovable, so that we in turn are loved by them. And nothing's more fulfilling than human beings who live in relationships and who both love and are loved simply for who they are. Now, I believe that very sincerely, but the trouble with that point of view is it kind of hints at utopia, just the sort of thing that sounds great but is actually disappointing. Because communities are quite difficult things. It requires time and investment, often investment in activities that we don't particularly want to do. And communities are stuffed with difficult people. Loving your neighbour is hard work. And bizarrely, it seems that my neighbour finds loving me just as difficult. In fact, quite often my neighbour shows very little inclination for the task. And often our response from that is to retreat into private life, or even if we dare to emerge, we only do it into communities of like-minded people. Social media these days makes it very easy to get in touch with people who are like-minded, and that's a wonderful thing. It's uplifting and satisfying to connect with people who think like you do and like the sort of things that you like. And we often refer to these things as communities, these groups, whether it's the cycling community or the gaming community or whatever. Those groups are great and a lot of fun and very fulfilling, but I don't think they're community in the true sense of the word. True community, I think, is something that happens when you're thrown together with people you don't choose, people you wouldn't normally associate with, people you don't necessarily have much in common with, and learn together to build a common life. Common unity. I think it's helpful to be attentive to the people who've been thrown together with us in life and think of ourselves as called to love them and be loved by them. Loving our neighbour as ourselves and even loving our enemies. It's all pretty counterintuitive, but I believe that if we love our enemies, we won't have any enemies anymore. If we love our neighbour, we'll find ourselves. And if we look outwards at others rather than inwards at ourselves, we find who we truly are in our inmost being. We can do that to some extent in any relationship, but nothing does it better than by learning to live alongside a group of people we don't choose, day after day, year after year. No hiding place, no safety net, no refuge from conflict, no easy answers, just community, because in their welfare lies your welfare.